Tony, would you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Tony Maniaty. I'm a senior lecturer in international journalism at the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia, and I'm currently in Aarhus at the Danish School of Media and Journalism as a visiting Erasmus Mundus scholar, teaching the Reporting Global Change course.
And you've been to East Timor once. Could you tell me about your experience there?
Sure. Well, I've actually been to East Timor twice. The first time was 1975. I was 26 years old. I was a very young journalist with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and there was trouble in East Timor, then a Portuguese colony. A lot of fighting was going on, and we took a film crew to East Timor and up to the border with Indonesia and tried to report what was happening. And very quickly we were fired upon with artillery shells. We had to get out of there. 5 other journalists, television journalists from Australia went up and they also were fired upon, but unfortunately they were killed. And over the years the Indonesians claimed that they were killed in crossfire. They were accidentally killed, but we had a coronial inquest in Australia 2 years ago which found that in fact they had been deliberately murdered.
By the military?
By the military, by the invading forces, because they had seen too much and they had filmed the illegal invasion of a foreign country.
Do you think that has any impact today, the way that the military handled this situation? Is that something that we will see in the future?
Very much so. That was in 1975 and the Vietnam War had just ended, and we had seen in Vietnam quite a lot of journalists were killed, but over a very long period, say 15 years, about somewhere between 40 and 70 media workers were killed. And in virtually all cases in Vietnam, they were in fact killed accidentally. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They weren't targeted because they were journalists. What we saw at Balabo in East Timor was a sudden change in that policy. And that is something that continued and grew dramatically during the Balkan conflicts in the 90s and got worse in Iraq. And really now the situation has become so dangerous that it's almost impossible for a television crew to go out to the front line of warfare without huge protection, both protection on their body, Kevlar suits and jackets and helmets, but also armed security people with them, armed with submachine guns, usually former SAS type soldiers, people who know what they're doing. Most journalists from the networks who go to those places now attend training courses in terms of their own safety. But even so, having said all that, the number of journalists and media workers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2002 has run into the hundreds. So we're seeing an epidemic, if you like, of journalists being targeted and killed. There's another aspect to it too. Journalists have become kidnap targets because various insurgent groups realize that if you capture a journalist, a Western journalist, particularly one from a very wealthy network like the BBC or CBS or CNN, then you might be able to get ransom of up to $2 million, $3 million for that person. And with that money, of course, you can buy more weapons.
Do you think that the military strategies today includes having to take care of journalists, moving them out of their way?
This is a very big debate. The military, the American military, for example, decided in the invasion of Iraq in 2003 to employ what they called embedding. That is to say, they would take journalists into their army units, not all the way up to the front line, usually 1 or 2 steps back, but enabling them to live with the soldiers who are fighting and to get stories, to get some footage of action, some kind of action. And that was moderately successful. Of course, a lot of journalists don't like that because that compromises their independence. They can't go wherever they want. They also feel obliged to the military. It's very hard to be critical of soldiers when they're effectively saving your life. So you can't really be totally independent. But it certainly would have saved some lives. Having said that, there is a very strong policy in the military that if you don't become embedded, if you choose to go alone, that's your own problem. And many journalists who were killed in Iraq were told by the Americans rather bluntly, well, you had the option of coming with us and you didn't, and you paid the price, the ultimate price.
What about the future for the war correspondents?
It's very interesting because it's got so dangerous now that a lot of people are not willing to send correspondents all the way to the front line. Always you can find correspondents who want to go there. They're young, they're ambitious. Of course it's a great career building move. It's very exciting. You can understand all the reasons why journalists want to do it. But I can also understand the network's problem. They have a duty of care, a responsibility to their staff. If their journalists are killed, a lot of questions will be asked about why didn't you protect them, why did you allow them to go so close to danger. And I think a lot of networks have become very shy of sending people to the front line. What we're seeing too is a very difficult and perhaps unethical situation where particularly smaller networks that can't afford to send correspondents and security people with them to the front line are employing local people, just giving local students a camera and saying, go up to the front line and get some pictures, and if you get some really good action shots we'll give you $500 or $1,000. But taking no responsibility for insurance, for their safety, for safety gear, etc. So there's a certain ethical problem there where you're sending people into danger to a place where perhaps you wouldn't send your own people.
How should a war correspondent today prepare him or herself
for battle? That's a very good question. I mean, if you can afford it, you should certainly take a security training course. There are lots of courses now in Europe and in Britain and America. Having said that, people have taken those courses and still been seriously injured or killed. The real conundrum, the real problem is that the best way to protect yourself is to get more and more experience. Usually the ones who do get killed, not always, but usually they are people who are very inexperienced.
So it's more dangerous to be young?
Yes, I'm afraid so. As you get older, you get a bit more concerned about your mortality, and usually, of course, as people get older, they marry, they have families, children to think about, so they're less likely to take the risks. But really, at the end of the day, it's really about common sense, knowing the territory very well, knowing how to move through enemy territory. One of the big problems now is that warfare is not conventional. It's totally unconventional and asymmetrical. So you might be with the American Armed Forces, but you're not confronting a similar army across a battlefield as you would have even in Vietnam. So much more likely that the people around you could be the enemy. You don't know who they are. A bomb could go off right next to your car. We had a case we were talking about here at the school where the bomber turned out to be a 12-year-old boy selling newspapers, a suicide bomber. So that's a frightening prospect. You can't tell who the enemy is. You can't really take many precautions against that sort of commitment to die that these people have.
What should be your final message to the coming war correspondents?
Well, keep your head down, be very careful about where you go, and always learn from experience. If you can't gather enough experience, make sure you're with people who have been there before. I think the best thing to do is attach yourself to experienced correspondents who've been there, who know the lay of the land, who understand the dangers, and if they move, you move with them. It's always wise to find a mentor in life, but particularly in a battlefield, it's a very good place to have someone with you who knows what they're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.